He was incredibly emotional. You know, he was basically appealing to the jurors' emotions. He put aside the evidence, the law. I would never do this. Do you think he won any points with the jury?
He may have. He had the right look. He had the right demeanor. He had the right emotion if he wanted to try to convince somebody on that jury that he didn't do it, or if he wanted to try to convince somebody not on that jury. And I think part of his goal may have been to speak to his son, to speak to his family, to speak to the community, to try to convince them that he's not guilty. Because one way or another, this guy's going to spend the rest of his life in prison.
Oh, yes, he is, considering he just admitted to all of his financial crimes, which was shocking, to say the least. Because according to Alec Murdaugh, he changed his clothes into the shirt and shorts before he went down to the kennel. So if you actually had seen him in the kennel video, according to him, he would be wearing the clothes that you saw him wear when he was interviewed by investigators. Does anything strike you as odd about that timeline?
Yeah, in which case, those clothes ought to be at the house at Moselle. He can name 90 other places where he used to keep clothes, but on his telling of this story, there is nowhere else those clothes would have ended up, because he took them off before he took a shower at Moselle. He didn't say he brought them somewhere else. They shouldn't have disappeared. They should be in that house, and it's very suspicious that they're not. His story doesn't hold together. I mean, he invites his wife home, then she wants to go down to the kennel. He doesn't want to go, but he goes, but he leaves. Then he goes back to the couch, but then he decides to go to his mom's. It's all very convenient, and his recollection is very convenient, typical for a defense witness. He can tell you in excruciating detail every exculpatory fact he wants you to know.
Right.
Other details, I don't know what happened to those clothes. I don't remember that financial crime. I don't remember that conversation.
So, because we would have to be believing then someone, the real killer or killers, waited for Alec Murdaugh to leave the kennels. By the way, they could have killed them, Maggie and Paul, before Alec even got there. Remember, he didn't first accompany him to the kennels, and then he comes down. So maybe either they knew he was going to come back, or maybe they showed up late. They have to wait for him to leave, then kill them, and then he comes back. I don't know if the effort is to frame him. I don't know why he wouldn't have been a victim in all this as well. That's the part that's so strange.
And get on and off the property without anyone encountering Alec Murdaugh.
Yeah, so that's something I think Creighton Waters is going to explore. I would imagine he would. All right, well, Rich, I'm going to turn it to you because you had an interesting take on this about maybe we're not looking at it the right way.
I'm going to give you what I think could be the prosecutor's spin. He testified that the Moselle property was 100% in Maggie's name and some other property was split. And then he offered this self-serving testimony that she always did what I said and she would sign anything. But to me, that actually establishes a possible motive, because if she was growingly concerned about his drug use, which we know she was looking at in the month prior to that, maybe she wasn't going to sign off on all of his finances. And if his financial troubles were going, him wanting complete control of those assets, which he says he had significant equity in, could be part of the motive. The second thing, Jesse, is he testified in his own defense that he suffered from extreme paranoia, that the drug use made him extremely paranoid, so much that he was paranoid of SLED, right? He was paranoid of law enforcement. Maybe he was paranoid of his detective son. Maybe he was paranoid of his wife. Maybe he wanted control of those assets. I actually think the motive case looks better after seeing him testify than it did before he testified.
Such an interesting take. I actually thought that too. The minute he said that he was having this paranoia, I thought it was only a matter of time before the prosecutors were like, okay, so were you paranoid enough to think that your wife and son were out to get you? That is possibly something that will be explored. Now, Rich, I go to you. I thought the strongest point was him saying, you really only came out today or yesterday with the kennel video and said you were there because the kennel video exists. You were painted yourself in a corner. You had nowhere else to go. And so it's not like you're being this benevolent guy who was always going to come forward. You never told anybody else about this.
That's right. Alec Murdaugh wants credit for now, he says, confessing to these financial crimes. But the point of the prosecutor is he was lying about all of this up until the day before yesterday. It's a great point made very effectively.
All right, here's the thing, Rich, and this is the thing I'll respond to. The times. He's on that kennel video at 8:45. The data suggests he's moving, as you heard, at 9:02. Whatever he remembers or doesn't remember, what he says he doesn't say, he's now not denying that that's him, and everybody said it's him. So now it places him in this kind of limited time frame, because the other suggestion would be someone was waiting for him to leave to kill Paul and Maggie. Why they didn't want to kill him would be a separate question, and he just said, you know, he didn't hear anybody around there. Now, again, taking aside whether he doesn't remember details, he doesn't, it's the data that I think is going to be critical here.
Right. The two most important pieces of evidence for the prosecution in this trial are, number one, now admitted that Alec Murdaugh lied about his whereabouts on the night of the murder, lied about being at the kennels. Number two, the timeline. The timeline has been in the benefit of the prosecution from the beginning. Towards the end of the prosecution's case, they really ramped it up. And Creighton Waters is killing Alec Murdaugh right now on the timeline because it doesn't make any sense. He says he was down there at 8:45. There was nobody else around, he says. The dogs weren't acting weird. There was nobody else. He got on a golf cart. He went back. He didn't lie down on the couch and go to sleep. He didn't have any time to. He got back up. We're going to hear that he shortly left to his mother's, but he didn't hear anything. He didn't hear any shots. It doesn't make any sense that he could have gotten to the kennels, out of the kennels, back to the property and off the property in that tight a timeline without seeing any of what happened. The mysterious 5'2" assassins that they now say were running around the property.
I agree with you. Unfortunately, the job that I have, I see family members killing family members in brutal fashion, and sometimes the victims are much younger than the ones we have here. And so nothing really would shock me. I guess, Rich, the thing that I'm wondering now is, what does Jim Griffin do when he has the opportunity to redirect, maybe later today? Because you have a client who's admitted to lying, you have a client who's admitted to stealing, you have a client who's admitting about all these things, and now it becomes a question, how do you rehabilitate his image? Because yesterday, when he came forward, it was quite emotional. I thought it might give the jury pause. So what do you think needs to happen to redirect?
I think you want to get back to that on redirect. I think you want to return to the emotion. I think that those were the high points of his direct in the first place, when he got very emotional about his wife and his son. And people said some of the jurors were tearing up over that. So he may have connected on the point. That's what they want to return to. By the way, I think, you know, we saw extensive cross-examination about the financial crimes yesterday. I think the prosecution did that in order to put a confession on each of those crimes on the record out of Alec Murdaugh's mouth. Because win or lose this trial, they're still prosecuting him for all those financial crimes.
Right.
And getting him to admit them under oath will be helpful in that endeavor.
So basically kill two birds with one stone, you know? He's going to be, he basically walked himself to prison with those, all those
Absolutely.
omissions. All right. Alec Murdaugh seemed to suggest was his life wasn't about to be exposed on June 7th, 2021. There wasn't this danger that Paul and Maggie knew about his drug problems well before that. So it wasn't like he was trying to cover anything up. There would be no reason for him to kill his family. And I will tell you, I think, you know, that could be a struggle for the jurors as well, about why he would do this. What do you think about that?
So I think Alec Murdaugh has helped piece this motive theory together, because the prosecution has laid the predicates that he was a drug addict and that he had severe financial problems. And you and I and many people have struggled. How does that get you till you shoot your son in the face? I mean, that's a big step. But Alec Murdaugh on the stand has testified under oath that he suffered from paranoia. And he said yesterday the reason he lied to law enforcement about the kennel video was because he was paranoid, because he was afraid of law enforcement. By the way, he was afraid of law enforcement. He worked in law enforcement. His family's worked in law enforcement for decades. But putting that aside, he's got extreme paranoia, and that is why he lied about the kennel video. Couldn't it also be part of the motive? Drug addiction plus financial catastrophe plus paranoia equals motive. That, to me, is a formula that might carry the day.
So look, I'm struggling with this case every day, Rich. I mean, I struggle with it because I look at it and I say the investigation, the police work was incredibly sloppy. Okay, I think we can agree to that. There are these deficits in the prosecution's case, like we talked about a lack of certain forensics that would be key, a kind of shaky motive, no murder weapons recovered. But there are these details that are really hard to get past, and it's really hard to think it's somebody else who did it. And Alec Murdaugh is burying himself, so it just feels to me that this is still going to be a hung jury.
It's going to be very close. If the prosecution loses this case, it's going to be because of the investigation. That crime scene was a crime scene, the way it was treated.
That is very true. Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's also interesting when you see Alec Murdaugh speaking, and Rich, we might have to jump back any second. He is speaking directly to the jurors. He's angling his body towards them. That is somebody who is experienced in that field, right? And knows what he's doing.
Don't underestimate that. He is sitting 6 or 10 feet from that jury. He's looking them in the eye. They have a very different reaction to him than you and me and Jamie do, and the viewers do, watching him on a screen. That's why we trust the jury to make credibility determinations. We don't trust me, for example.
All right, let's jump back live.